Hi everyone, welcome to Maximum Attack Rallying and welcome to a new series of videos that I've been thinking about doing for a while, but it's time to finally get on with it, stop putting it off. So, what is this series all about? Well, it's going to be hopefully around 3 episodes. You'll have to forgive me if we end up going over that, but I'll try and keep it contained within 3 episodes. But I wanted to do a series about one of my old cars because it's something that I've posted about quite a lot, talked about a bit, but it all happened before I really got serious with the channel, so I thought let's have a bit of a look back and talk about it. And it is the car behind me, the yellow Escort RS2000. So we're going to dive a bit more into that car and what it was all about. So I guess it will hopefully help you to understand a little bit more about me and my kind of rallying background. So before we get to that, so right now I own 3 cars. I don't own the yellow Escort anymore, but I own 3 cars, so maybe we'll do a bit more about all of those cars. So right now in my life I have a Peugeot 208 GT, which is my everyday car here in Saudi Arabia. I also have a Renault Sport Clio 197 here in Saudi Arabia, which was my everyday car but is kind of sitting waiting to have some work done to it because it's got a few issues. And I also own an Escort Formula 2 car, which is really more of a collection of parts than an actual car, and that's back in the UK. So there is going to be more videos about that in the future, hopefully working on some things to kind of get that moving so we can do some more videos about that. But I thought we'd start with the old yellow RS2000 because that's kind of a car that was very important in my rallying journey, and it was the car I did my first event in. So let's get into that. As I said, there's going to be 3 parts. There's a lot to get through. Obviously, a lot happened with that car. I owned it for 7 years roughly. So there's lots and lots to get through, but I will try and keep it relatively brief. Anything I don't answer, if you have any questions, if you think, well, why didn't he talk about that bit, just put them in the comments and I'll try my best to answer them. So let's get into it. Backstory first. So I bought the car in 2012. It was at the end of 2012. I bought it from my friend Mike, who I'd known around the time since I think he bought the car in about 2009. I'd known him most of that time. We'd sort of connected through the RS2000 kind of community, because at the time I had road going RS2000s. So I bought the car in 2012. Mike had done quite a lot of work to it over the period that he'd owned it. And we'd been chatting. I think by that time I'd helped him out on a couple of events. I think one of them was at Snetterton and one was at RAF Honington, because he was competing on kind of club events in Norfolk. So I knew him already and we chatted a bit. I was actually planning to build my own car. At one stage I actually had a similar age Escort, I think it was a 1.8 SI that I bought from another friend. And the plan was actually to build a rally car out of that, but as things turned out, I lost storage for that car, I seem to remember, so it had to go. And Mike was actually offered a Lancia Delta HF 4-wheel drive rally car that he'd known of for many, many years. So that car had competed in the early 90s on events around Norfolk and Suffolk around the same time that he competed. So he started to compete in the early 90s in an MG Maestro. He actually won the 2-wheel drive 2-litre Association of Eastern Motor Clubs Championship in that MG Maestro, and this Lancia was competing out around the same time. So when that car came up for sale in 2012, he decided that he absolutely had to have it. So he contacted me and asked if I wanted the Escort. It all went from there. So that's kind of how my ownership came about. But I have managed to do a bit of research into the car's history. Mike had done a bit as well, but I kind of continued that just because I was curious as to what its backstory was, because I'm a bit of a loser and I love that kind of thing. So let's have a quick look at that, shall we? I think that's a decent point to get to next. So we'll have a look at how the car kind of started its life and why in particular it ended up with this weird Q plate, which a lot of people always ask me about for some reason. And the short answer about that is that I don't actually know. So the car was put on a Q plate, I seem to remember, in around about the year 2000, and I don't know why, but it was converted into a rally car around the same time. So I don't know if somebody had bought it as perhaps something that was stolen, recovered, or there'd been some kind of issue with it. So they bought it cheap because of that, and then turned it into a rally car. So just thinking back, this was a long time ago. So the first owner of the car as a rally car that I found was Shelley Taunt. Shelley is probably best known for competing in Super Imprezas more recently, but she owned the car in around 2001. She only did one event in the car. At the time, her family actually owned the Silverstone Rally School. I don't know if that was the Silverstone, if the rally school was based on the rally stage that they used for the super specials of the RAC rally, the one that's now under the Porsche kind of experience track, or if it was kind of on a different part of the site. But anyway, her family owned that. It wasn't a rally school car, because I have asked her that, but she owned it. She did one event in it and then moved on to other things. At this time, I managed. She sent me one grainy picture of the car, which I'll put up now, where it had tiger stripes. And when I saw that picture, I thought, oh my god, why didn't the car look like that? When I bought it, the car didn't look anything like that. And if it had, I probably wouldn't have touched it, and it wouldn't have turned into this massive, long, drawn-out project. But it did. But I managed. She did her one event in the car was at Longcross, and I managed to find some additional pictures through Andy Madston, who's a well-known photographer in that region, and he had some pictures of the car from this event, which you'll also be seeing right now. So it shows that it was a very standard-looking car at this time, very little modification. It was very similar spec to the RS2000 Rally Sport Challenge, or RS2000 Rally Sport Series cars from 92 and 93, so very, very basic. So she only did one event in the car, as I said, and then she sold it on. And over the next few years, between 2001 and 2009, when Mike bought it, it went through a couple of different owners, and that's when it started to get more modified. So the big visual change to the car during that period was that it spawned these kind of wider arches that were on it when Mike bought it, and they are actually trailer mudguards. So a little bit agricultural, let's say that. So someone had bought a set of steel mudguards for a trailer, two sets, cut them in half, and welded them, just bodged them into the arches, the standard arches. So they cut the standard arches back, and that was obviously to give the car more wheel clearance and more width, because it had extended lower arms, extended track rods, it had Group A top mounts, so it had all been kind of pushed out, had longer drive shafts, and on the rear that it had like hub spaces like the F2 cars had. So it had been made wider. Otherwise though, it wasn't too excessively modified. They painted part of the car yellow, rather, because it was blue obviously originally, so it kind of gained this two-tone livery. But mechanically the engine was pretty standard. It had, so RS2000s had this weird kind of air pulse system, they called it, which was part of emissions control, and it had these sort of prongs that went into the exhaust manifold, so that had been removed. And it had a Quaife diff, it had an Ashley Group N exhaust system, but it had Bilstein dampers, but mechanically otherwise it was actually pretty standard. It had safety devices, roll cage, it had been stripped out of it inside, but it was actually fairly basic. So it did a few events like this over the years, and as I said, Mike then bought the car in 2009, and that's where I kind of got more information about its story, because obviously he tracked what he was doing and kind of kept a bit more of a progress blog, if you like, through the RS2000 community, and obviously I was speaking to him by this point. So that was where my knowledge of the car started to really increase. And so Mike is a bit like me. Mike is a big fan of the F2 era, and I'm very jealous because he's a bit older than me, and he actually got to go to the Manx Rally in 1997. So he was there when there was this, was it a five-way battle for the British Rally Championship title, and Gwyndaf Evans was there in the Escort Maxi, which was competing in the UK for the first time. It was all like a super exciting period for the BRC. So he was there, and that was a big inspiration for him, that era. And he wanted to inject a bit of that. So he'd had a long period out of rallying since competing in the Maestro to buying this Escort. So he'd had a family and kind of settled down. And this was kind of his ticket back into the sport. And he wanted to get a bit of that F2 kit car flavour, but didn't want to go the whole hog, didn't have the budget to go the whole hog. So he decided to update the car a little bit. So at this point, this is when the facelift, so it started obviously as a very early Mark V RS2000, and Mike facelifted it to a later car. So he added the Mark VI front and rear ends, he added the Group A headlights, I think it had the side skirts from a later car, didn't it already? So he did the kind of facelift, painted the car white, fitted the kit car spoiler to the roof, or not to the roof, to the top of the tailgate, which I know is a divisive item. So he gave the car this kind of new look. He also did some kind of remedial work to it. It was when he bought it in 2009, so it had been a rally car for 8 years when he had it. It was still in pretty good shape. But you know, he did. I know he had new lower arms made from the front, and just had a few other bits and pieces to just kind of keep the car going. Mechanically, though, it stayed pretty much as it was, and he did local events in the car. As I said, it was kind of his ticket back into the sport after a long layoff. So he was doing events in Norfolk. So as I said, I think I went to Snetterton with him and serviced on the car where it had a bit of a knock into the into the Armco. I think it was on the pit straight. The weather was absolutely terrible that day. It was super slippery. And I think going into a chicane that they'd put on the pit straight at Snetterton, the back end stepped out, and I think he nudged the barrier and did some damage to the front of the car. So it had that event, and he did Honington, he did Woodbridge. So if you're from East Anglia, you will know that these are kind of typical events for that region, airfield style. You know, very simple entry level kind of grassroots rallies in the UK. So he did a few of those and was starting to progress, and that was kind of it. You know, he was going to continue with that and continue evolving the car. But this was when this Lancia thing happened. He was offered this Delta, as I said, and he and I started to we had actually talked about me buying the car, but then he kind of decided to keep hold of it until this Lancia thing came along, and that was that. So it was at that point I took ownership of the car, and it was as Mike had it. It was white, you know, kit car spoiler, still had the trailer mudguard arches because he hadn't. He decided it wasn't really worth doing, you know, trying to change that, and that was it. So I took it on, and the reason for me buying it was just to get started. It was a car that I could buy, not really have to do anything to, and just start competing. So that was in 2012. I'd just done my bars test, so the plan was quick turnaround, you know, maybe make a couple of small changes to the car, and then just go and do some rallies. It did not work out that way. I think that's probably the best point to stop this video, because I think the next video is all about how things just got totally out of hand. Partly just because of some unforeseen issues. I think a lot of it was my fault and just probably getting a little bit ahead of myself and trying to do too much. But we will get into that in more detail in the next episode. So we'll leave it there. I hope you found this part interesting. You're talking about the history of the car, because it did have quite an interesting backstory. It's actually gone on to an interesting life since I sold it, but we'll come to that in the future episodes. So that's kind of where we're at so far. As I said, in the next episode, we will look in more detail at what I did with the car over the time that I had it, the modifications, because I made some really big changes to that car, probably the biggest changes it had since it had been turned into a rally car. I kind of took Mike's concept a bit further. So we'll get into that into the next video. This video will be going out on Thursday if you're watching it when it was launched. I'm not going to drag these out over weeks and weeks and weeks, so I'll try to get the next one out on Saturday, so stay tuned for that, and then the final part will hopefully go out on Monday. So I hope you enjoy it. As I said, if I don't cover anything in these videos, drop it into the comments and I'll try and answer. And I will see you again in episode 2.